We are continuing with 3 presentations that will happen, and then we will have a conversation amongst us. We will start with the presentation by Eléni Myrivíli. Eléni Myrivíli is the Global Chief Heat Officer for the Atlantic Council and the UN-Habitat, and her work is dedicated to advancing heat resilience in cities worldwide. Is a subject which is very, very relevant, is very important. She's recognized amongst one of the most important scientists who have helped shape the topic, the area in 2023. And today she sits on the board of directors of the EU Mission for Adaptation and the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Assessment. She is a former deputy mayor of Athens. She led the city's urban resilience program, and she secured European funding for it, a program that had immense impact on the city of Athens. She is a fellow at Harvard, and she holds a PhD in anthropology from Columbia University. After Eléni, we will continue the presentations with presenting the work of Thomas Doxiadis, and after that, the work of Bas Smets. And these 3 presentations will be followed by a conversation. So thank you very much, Eléni, for being here. Thank you for joining us.
Okay. Can I leave this with you, and as I change it here? No, because I'll have to change 2. Yes. Okay, I'll figure it out. All right. Hello. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I can't believe how beautiful this park is and this space is. So thank you very much for your invitation, Vasilis. And great to be with Bas and with Tomas in the same panel. It's a great, great pleasure. So I wanted to start by saying that indeed I studied anthropology, and my PhD was about borders, about national borders, and how national borders are hiding, because I looked at the border that was on a lake where the Greek, Albanian, and North Macedonian borders meet, and it was called the liquid border. So they were kind of invisible borders. And I was looking at how these borders, even though they're invisible and they look natural and beautiful, they actually have this violence that subtends them, and that's what makes them borders. And it's like a special kind of violence, which is the inaugural violence of the nation state. And of course, I always thought about them as, not of course, I kind of thought about them as ghosts, as specters. And of course, there's a whole archaeology of this idea of the spectre, and it goes back to Marx and to Derrida, et cetera, et cetera. And so when I was talking with Martin and Asma about what this talk was going to be, I kind of remembered that this idea of the ghost was something that I had in my past. And somehow I realized that working with heat has to do with this idea of the ghost also. And so I started, I was a professor, and then because of climate change, I got really worried, and I decided to run for city government. And I was elected, and I started, the first job that I was given was to do the resilience strategy for the city of Athens. And it was very much a bottom-up process where with tons and tons of people, we'd created the strategy for the city. And at the time, nobody was talking about heat. And we were part of 100 cities around the world, including Paris and other kind of cities that were doing the same process for doing a resilience strategy. And very few cities were actually focusing on extreme heat as part of the resilience strategy at the time. Paris was just starting to think about it, but very few of the 100 cities were talking a lot about flooding and sea level rise and things like that. But, and the people in the city of Athens, the policymakers and mayors and deputy mayors, nobody thought this was an important issue at all, but the people were worried about it. So it came from the people, this idea of, well, heat, we're kind of dealing, there's heat waves, it's not, this is something we should look into. And then when we finished the strategy, I asked the mayor, and he actually appointed me as deputy mayor for green. And I changed the title, and I made it the deputy mayor for urban nature, urban resilience, and climate adaptation, because I wanted people to start thinking of these things together, and how urban nature is our best shield to this heat issue, at least. And then when my term finished, I stuck with it, and I ended up doing a fellowship and decided that I have to work with cities and heat. And indeed, things started getting worse, quite worse. You can see here, this is like, at the bottom is like the pre-industrial era, how years kind of went by, and what the average global temperatures were like. And then in 2023, it kind of jumps up above 1.5 Celsius. And then from 2023 onward, from the middle of 2023, throughout 2024 and 2025, we have temperatures that are above 1.5 degrees. And what is, apart from the fact that we have the Treaty of Paris that said we would stay around 1.5. The issue is that we have this very sharp speeding up of heating of our planet the last 10 years that everybody agrees. As you can see, all the major kind of climate scientists and agree, the big kind of research centers that have these types of data agree that this is happening. And they don't really know why, because even though indeed we are speeding up, we're also speeding up the production of CO2 emissions. This is again from Copernicus. We see that this year, we're really going on a sharp incline. We haven't actually reduced our CO2 emissions the last few years. We had a bit of a dip, but it didn't last. This doesn't really, scientists are saying that it's an unknown, really, why it's speeding so fast. And they're trying to figure out other reasons of why this is such a speed, such an intense kind of acceleration. And they're talking about partially the reflexivity of clouds as part of why this is not going with the models that they had up to now, because they're feeling that a lot of scientists, not all of them, that the models that they've been using are not adequate to talk about this acceleration. So what does it mean, 1 or 1.5 degree more of average global temperatures? So people keep asking me that, and I think that one of an interesting way of understanding it is that if now at 1.5 degrees we have about 67 cities around the world, big cities around the world, that are suffering temperatures more than 35 degrees Celsius for more than 150 days per year. At 2 degrees, which we're definitely going to surpass, it's going to be about 100 cities that are dealing with this. And at 3 degrees, which they say that now we're going towards 2.7, 2.8 degrees by the middle of the century, the way we're going, 197 cities are going to be dealing with more than 35 degrees Celsius, which is temperatures that are definitely very dangerous for people's health, for more than almost half a year. Another way of thinking about it is that, which is a research out of Lancet, in the Lancet Countdown that does health and climate, came up with, was that if we reach 2 degrees Celsius, the percentage of people that we lose from extreme heat is going to go up. The number of people that we lose from extreme heat is going to go up 370%. So this is the kind of, I think, this is a way to wrap our minds around it. And what does it really mean on the ground? Like, for example, in 2021 in Canada, we had this crazy globe heat dome that lasted for more than 6 days was the peak. It reached 49 degrees Celsius. I don't know if you remember it. It was the Pacific Northwest and Canada, and the city of Lighton just kind of immolated because the winds were so strong and the drought and the heat was so prolonged that they still don't know what actually burned the city down. And 12 million excess costs for the health system and 600 people that died. In Iran, we had actually 2 days where the government closed everything down because the temperatures were over 50 degrees Celsius in 2023. In 2024, in India, we had the longest heat wave ever. India, in the 197 cities that I was saying before, India has 100 of the 197 cities that are going to be. So India is really, really, really ground zero for this kind of stuff. And of course, it's not just happening there because, as we know, Europe is heating up faster than the global average, and a big part of it is because of the Mediterranean region, but also because the water in the Mediterranean is heating up a lot. There's temperatures that are coming, climate that's coming from Africa. But we also have kind of anomalies that have to do with Northern Europe as well, which we don't know how it's going to work out. But I want to remind everyone that 2022, which was the heat wave that was mostly in Northern Europe, left, it kind of is interesting because we start understanding how all of these different cascading interacting problems kind of interlock with each other, because, for example, that year, not only did we have this extraordinary heat wave which left more than 61,000 people dead that are related to heat, deaths that are related to heat, mostly in cities, 18,000, for example, in Italy. But also it came with an incredible drought that influenced the energy generation. So energy generation was influenced because there was not enough water for the hydroelectric power, but also for cooling the nuclear power that was being produced. So they lowered the amount of energy that they were producing, but also because of the low levels of the rivers, the transportation was more difficult. They could only transport 25% of the things that they usually could transport, so the prices went up. We had also the war that had started in Ukraine in 2022, and we had food prices going up as well. I mean, it was like almost like a perfect storm in 2022. And of course, 2023 and 2024, I'm not going to get into it. But this is what I was talking about. This is an interesting kind of way of looking at it, because when we have an event like a crisis, like a heat wave, we have these direct impacts, like, for example, to our health and to our health system, to our ecosystems, to infrastructure, to water, and then secondary impacts. And then you see water, how crucial water is for all of it, because water actually affects all of the different systems that are the critical systems upon which we depend. So it's kind of, I think this is an interesting depiction to have in mind. And then if you look at one system, which is the health system, let's say, you have the direct impacts, which is what happens to people in extreme heat, but then you have the indirect impacts where so when you are looking after your health system, you have to think about, oh, I'm going to need a lot more ambulances. I'm going to need more kind of people working in the emergency room. I'm going to need kind of, because there's more accidents in extreme heat also, I'm going to need a lot of trauma kind of people ready for it. I need kind of to prepare for disease, vector-borne diseases, and food kind of going bad, and et cetera, et cetera. So, and of course, I have to think about, to make sure that the power is working, the power grid is working, and the water is working, and the transportation is working, and and productivity is possible, and the communications are possible. So all of these systems, what I'm trying to say is that all of these systems are extremely interconnected. And when you're working for a city, it's really crazy because you have to think about all these things, because you are ultimately responsible for all these things. And if you've worked for a city during a crisis, it's really crazy. So you all know about the urban heat island, so I'm not going to get much into it. Over there you can see the straight line is the land surface temperatures, and the dotted line is the air temperature, and the yellow lines are for daytime, and the blue lines are for nighttime. I just thought it's kind of interesting, this weird dip that happens there, where they approach each other, the day and the night, which is the pond. So ponds can actually, because they are really the sinks for heat, in the night, they can actually be radiating a lot of heat, almost as much as impermeable surfaces that we know are actually absorbing heat. This is why we have the urban heat island, right? We have all these very mineralized surfaces that absorb heat. So I thought this is kind of interesting. And this is just the effects of heat, and I mean, yeah. So heat. This weird kind of, I think of it, this weird ghost that goes into a city and kind of looks at where weakness is. It's more than any other extreme weather event. It actually finds the weakest people, the poor people, the old people, and attacks them. Like who are the most vulnerable? The older people, the people with pre-existing conditions, the people with mental health issues, the babies, the mothers that are pregnant, the workers, especially the workers with the low-paying jobs, manual workers, the people that are living in the poor parts of town, informal settlements. I mean, it's really uncanny how it has this knowledge to go and hit our weak ones. And this is particularly children, especially when schools close, because a lot of schools close when we have extreme heat events. It creates a big problem, especially usually to women who are also vulnerable, that often live in houses that are, don't have any air conditioning or cooling. So basically you create a secondary problem by closing schools. Schools should be the resilience centers, and Paris and other cities have done this, have been really reconceptualizing schools as the places where we go when there's extreme heat or other types of women are particularly vulnerable to extreme heat physiologically. We are made in ways that we don't process extreme heat as well as men do. And we also have social, cultural, and economic reasons that we are more vulnerable than men, to a large extent because women end up working for longer hours than the hours that they're paid for, under conditions that are usually non-adaptable because they have to take care of other vulnerable people, like old people or children. So it ends up being a particularly vulnerable group, not just when they're pregnant. In general, women, especially in the global south, are extremely vulnerable to heat. There are tons of stories, but I'm not going to get into it because we don't have time. And old people. It's unbelievable. From 2000 to 2019, we have a double, like people that we are losing from extreme heat has actually doubled that are above 65 years old globally. Okay, so why is it this pernicious spectre? Because like heat is the deadliest of all extreme weather phenomena, but it doesn't leave any traces. So what are things that are really crucial that we don't know? We don't know the physiological impact that heat has on our bodies. Exactly. We really don't know how it affects and how it interacts with comorbidities and other types of sicknesses, how it affects exactly the medicine that we're taking during extreme heat. For example, we know that when we're taking antidepressants, we're lowering our capacity to withstand extreme heat. We don't know how these things work. We don't know how the brain works. We know, for example, that we can't absorb knowledge, and children that end up, going to school during extreme heat waves, or babies that are in extreme heat waves have like a limited problem with knowledge acquisition. We don't know why this happens. So we have all the, or why at different stages of our lives we are affected differently from heat. Also, ecosystems, there's a lot of now focus on how different, the combination between plants and pollinators are affected by extreme heat, and how this could, how could this affect different aspects of our ecosystems and the animals as well. Oh. The other very important part, which is an unknown, which, in France, I don't think is such a big problem because you do have data about mortality, but a lot of countries around the world, and definitely most of the cities around the world, we don't have data about how many. So when you have a heat wave, the heat wave happens, and then nobody really knows what was the effect or the impact of the heat wave. Like last year in Greece, we had an incredible heat wave. It was unbearable. It lasted on and on and on for weeks, and it was really like no respite, and we were really suffering, and most of us had to actually leave the city because it was so unbearable. Of course, not everybody can leave the city, but anyway, it was really unbearable, and we don't know how many people died. I have no idea how many people ended up in the hospital or how many people died. So there's also a lack of recognition and knowledge and awareness already that even people in nurses or hospitals do not really know the symptomatology and how to recognize things. So what about the other issue has to do with how we measure heat, which is also a very interesting thing. A lot of different measurements of heat. We have land surface temperatures, we have air temperatures, we have the wet bulb globe temperature, we have the heat index, we have the UTCI, Bass's favorite, the urban, Universal Thermal Climate Index. Many, the humidex, tons of ways of measuring heat which create problems because there's no, it's not easy to communicate between different people, what is happening, etc. And of course, there is an enormous issue about how to inform the people correctly, and where do people actually get their information, and who do they trust with information these days because of misinformation and disinformation and all this mess that we are in today, and of course how, etc. All these things are affected. So what are we doing with this big problem? So around 2022, 23, the global finances that go to climate change doubled, and we are now around 1.3, 1.4, close to 1.5 trillion that go to climate change globally, all the types of finances that go there. As you can see from on the top there, most go to mitigation, where we have public sector and private sector participating. Very little goes to adaptation. And I just wanted to kind of give you this background information. For COVID, in 2022, emergency fiscal measures, the finances globally that went to COVID issues and fiscal measures were 11.7 trillion for 1 year. And all we've managed to do for climate is 1.3, 1.4. And so why so little to adaptation? And what am I doing? Oh, here we go. So uncertainty and complexity, what are we trying to achieve? It's very often difficult to articulate what are our targets for the adaptation. What are we shooting for? Is it, limiting deaths? How do we measure that? Is it lowering temperatures? How exactly do we make sure that, et cetera? There's many, many uncertainties that are linked to it and a complexity of how to approach the issue. Scale is a very big issue in adaptation. What's the best scale? Should I be local, regional, national? This is also like a big issue. And local specificity, it becomes very specific when you want to adapt in Arles as opposed to when you want to adapt in Athens. Very different contexts. Governance and policy coherence. Again, every level of government has its own policies. There is no streamlining between policies, a very big issue in general. Capacity. How many landscape architects are working in cities? How many ecologists? How many thermodynamic people? Like very, very few. And there's a real lack of capacity to do these things. Temporal challenges. Mayors come and go. 4 years, they change. Equity and justice, very big issues. And of course, environmental trade-offs. I'm going to skip this, and I'm going to go to this. Because the previous one said that basically most cities are doing early warning systems, because we know through early warning systems, which was a mandate of the Secretary General in the UN, that we need to kind of have warnings for everyone, actually saves a lot of lives, and it's true. But the long-term things, the green infrastructure that actually are more long-term and we need for our cities are not, even though they're great results for the buck, they're not as easy and not so big a ratio. But this is something that came out in 2023, which was really important for all of us that are trying to persuade policymakers and people that were trying to ask them to fund these, which is that actually they measured in 98 cities around Europe that if you increase the canopy cover by 30%, you can actually have 1/3 less of the premature deaths that are caused by extreme heat. So these types of measurements are super important for dealing with these issues and getting finance for them. And this is like a very interesting thing, which it's some metadata that they collected from 182 studies across the world, globally, for 110 cities, and they looked at how trees are lowering temperatures. And they looked at different types of cities, and they looked at different positionings in the city, whether it was densely built or more open space, et cetera. They looked what kind of trees. They had evergreens, deciduous, or mixed. And they also had the different types of climate and climate zones. And I thought that this is an interesting thing, because in tropical climates, they saw that the lowering of temperatures can go from -2, like going down 2 degrees, to going down 12 degrees in Nigeria, depending on the type of the tropical temperatures that we have. In arid climates, they have found that you can lower it down to 9.3 degrees Celsius, but we can have also a warming effect, which is something that we can talk about, because sometimes heat gets trapped under the tree canopies as well, and it's something that also can happen. And in continental climates, et cetera, and in temperate climates, we have -6 degrees to 1.5 degrees heating. So what cities kind of do generally to begin with is we usually map, and we map and we kind of see where heat is and where we have like the hotspots, and where are our vulnerabilities and our exposure, where are our poor people, where are our older people, and try to map things out. And this is like, we don't really need, I think, extreme detail, because we can totally figure out where to prioritize things with some basic maps and basic vulnerability and exposure. But it's important for creating an argument and persuading policymakers and decision makers that that's where we should do things. And the way that the rule of thumb and the heuristic way that I go about in creating heat action plans is by doing these 3 buckets of policies. And the first policy bucket is awareness raising, which still today, as I said before, we need to raise awareness of how dangerous heat is. And for example, categorizations of heat waves is an important thing. We have categorizations of hurricanes and categorizations of wind speeds, etc., but we don't usually have categorization of heat waves. We have started the last 2 or 3 years, but it's, again, the last 2 or 3 years. And then this is linked to having early warning systems and to make sure that the right people get the alerts. And then we go into the preparedness, which is like all of the policies that the city can take to make sure that people are protected during heat waves, which is super important. And from opening cooling stations to now we have this really cool thing called parametric insurance that we started in India. It's okay. I don't know if I have, am I bad? I'm okay? I have 1 minute? Good. And then I'll come back to the parametric insurance. And then finally, the redesign, which is the biggest and the most important part, which has to do with how do we design cities, new parts of cities, or retrofit our old cities so that we make sure that, that we can live in them in the next few decades. And this, of course, means a radical bringing of nature into cities, which means making some difficult choices sometimes in cities, figuring out how the wind moves around cities, figuring out how to bring water and make sure that we have enough water, so make backups and robust systems as much as we can in relation to our water, because we'll need it. And getting rid of the heat-producing things like cars and et cetera, being very careful about how we use air condition and how much. But also in the build sector, understanding that we have to have the right. Who was I talking to this morning? And they were telling me that in Paris, I think it was, anyway, Valerie. In Paris, they're starting to create this building codes, and other cities around the world are trying to do the same, but they haven't started yet. They haven't managed yet to make a law of the right to cross ventilation, or the right to ventilation when you build a building or when you retrofit a building, the right to access to water, of course, for every citizen in the city, and finally the right to shade, and being able to be in the shade. And these are, especially wind and shade, are the first things that when we are talking about the build sector we have to think about, and then insulation. We often think of insulation because we're used to energy retrofits, but as far as heat is concerned, insulation is the third part. The first things are wind and shade. And, what am I doing? And this is, I think, my last slide, which is what are cities doing around the world. Cities are having a really hard time because cities are not getting enough funds, and they're really struggling because they have to protect the citizens. And they are doing amazing work. And I feel for them because they have to really work fast and try to figure out how to deal with these crazy realities that are cascading and complex more and more every day and every year that passes, and they're maturing really fast. From when I was working in 2016 and 2017 with cities to now, it's unbelievable how fast cities have learned and are moving forward. And so I just want to kind of, talk about 2 or 3 of them. One is the Medellin corridors. It started with 36 corridors. It's a very famous city because it really created these green corridors. And the guys that designed them had 3 principles. The first principle was shade, provide shade to people so they can walk around in the city under shade. The second one was biodiversity, make sure that you increase biodiversity and the ability, connectivity within the city, and have at least 4 strata of green when you do them. And the third principle was design them so you bring joy to the people of the city. So, and the other one that I want to talk about is this, and I'll finish with that. We created a special tool which is called parametric insurance, which is a new way of using insurance, it's called parametric because it's based on a specific parameter. So you set a parameter and you say, okay, when heat becomes I don't know, 38 or 40 degrees, then what happens is that the insurance is released, or if there is a forecast for the next 2 days that we're going to reach 40 degrees or above, or 38 degrees or above, then funding is released, for example, to the city to do specific things in advance. Like, insurance usually works afterwards, but the great thing is that when we work in advance, we are actually doing much better. We spend much less and we have much better results. So what we did is we worked together with these women at SEWA in India, the Self-Employed Women's Association, which has 4 million women that are part of SEWA. And together with these women and other insurance companies and funders, et cetera, we set up this tool, which is actually releasing these women are the lowest paying people in India. They rummage through waste and do recycling of waste. They work in the construction sector. More women in India work in the construction sector than men, by the way. I thought that was an interesting piece of data that I heard. So these women often carry metal things and heavy things, and often they burn their hands, and they work under really bad conditions, or they sell things sitting on the ground. So this insurance does 2 things. It provides them with things like gloves and tarps for shading or sitting, or water coolers, et cetera, but also if the heat is above a specific level, then it gives them their daily wage so that they don't have to go to work, so they can stay at home. So here I will end, and I think, I don't have, no, that's it. Thank you very much.